Sure. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is because Ritu Shastri, who's Aleka's mum, and Aleka is a student at the school. Ritu and I have been friends for over 30 years. We met each other in our early 20s. And as often happens with empowering, authentic, close female friendships, we have raised each other's children as well. And I am today mother of two, stepmother of two. I have four boys between the ages of 22 and 30. And I have experienced, I can safely say, all of the stages of sort of self-doubt, insecurity, unhappiness, confusion, um, the sense of being lost as you try to grapple with how do you build your lives and how do you build increasingly for a life that's going to be a span of 70 or 80 or 90 years. And one of the reasons that I accepted the invitation to come and talk to people here today is because it's something I reflect on not just as a parent, or as an aunt, but often I reflect on this as a woman and as a successful professional who does work not only in India but also across the world. And I thought I'd start by telling you a little bit about my own personal journey and sort of the takeaways from that and why I feel understanding how we fail, why we fail, and why it's important for us to fail is what I thought that I really wanted to talk about. So I come from a traditional South Indian family, and in India, across India, but particularly in South India, this idea that education is the key to any sort of empowerment, success, happiness, validation is a very, very powerful thing. This is bred into you before you're even able to speak. This idea that to be counted as a valuable human being, you must excel academically. And like many others of my generation, I'm turning 56 in December, in the 70s, this was what I set out to do. And as a highly motivated, older of two girls, in a family where my father constantly told us that we could be anyone we wanted to be, I pushed myself from very early on to excel academically, and I did. When I finished the 10th standard, I did an exam in India called the ICSE, which is a school leaving exam, and I stood fourth in the country. And instead of being absolutely delighted, I was miserable because standing fourth in the country meant that I had a whole host of people, family, friends, teachers, institutions, telling me what I should be: a doctor, an engineer, a medical scientist, a physicist, an explorer. The reality was, yes, I had 100% in mathematics. Yes, I had 98% in physics. But all that really meant was that I was good at taking exams. I had absolutely no interest in pursuing a life or a career in either mathematics or physics or biology that would lead me down to the path of what in India was considered at that time, and still is to a great extent, conventionally successful. But at 16, you don't know these things, and it's so easy to succumb to the world's view of yourself as a successful individual. And although I loved dance, I loved art, I loved color, I loved reading, I loved books, I loved nature, I chose to study physics, chemistry, mathematics, and electronics in the 11th and 12th. I also realized that if I remained in India, I would be very quickly found out because entrance exams to engineering colleges and medical colleges in India are not easy things. But I had this amazing thing. I had come forth in the country. And so I applied. I wrote an exam called the SAT, and I applied to colleges in the United States of America. I knew nothing about America. I'd never been to America. And I also knew nothing about which institution, which college, and why. In the time when I did my SAT, the application form allowed you to enter the names of 4 colleges. And I found this all out because there was a second-hand bookshop down the road from our home, and there was a magazine called Society. Indian ladies or Indian people here will know Society magazine. And this issue of Society magazine, I think it was June 1986, had on the cover James Bond's Octopussy. I'll never forget it. And the reason it was on the cover was because this was being shot in Udaipur and produced by a gentleman called Anand Amritraj, whose brother, Vijay Amritraj, is a well-known tennis player. And I had that, and in that it had this article about how you can go abroad to study. Abroad was the universal term for the United States of America. So when you said abroad, you meant you looked at a college in America. So I went off, got this form free, could apply to 4 colleges, also free. And I chose 4 colleges, and this will tell you how ignorant I was. I chose the University of California at Berkeley. I chose the University of Pennsylvania. I chose Harvard University. And I chose a small, obscure women's college in Western Massachusetts called Smith College. And as is with these things, there is, whether we like to admit it or not, a formula. There are things that educators look for, parents look for, colleges look for. And when you are determined to leave something, nothing can be bigger impetus than that. And I had this IIM, IIT thing looming, and I knew the only way away from that was to actually change the geography and the context within which these conversations would be had. I applied, and I got into all 4 institutions. And then when I had a conversation with my family, I got in with a full scholarship to all 4 because I knew that's the only way I would be permitted to go, because it didn't fit my family's notion of what a successful woman in the 80s would look like, right? I remember when I was 15 saying to my mother, oh, you know what? And my mother is a classical music, she sings Hindustani classical music. She's a composer and a teacher. At 81, she still teaches. And I said to my mother, you know what I want to do is to have a professional career in dance. I think I want to be a classical, a dancer. And she said, are you crazy? Nobody will marry you. And this was the same woman who had woken up every morning at 4:30 to drive us to our dance class, and who spent 45 minutes every single day making us practice on the beach so that we would strengthen our ankles and our tendons in our foot, so that when we danced, we would have better balance, be more perfect. And this was the same person who said, you don't do these things to pursue them as careers. These are hobbies. A career is something serious. So there I was. When I had this conversation with them, they said, no, okay, there's a women's college, you can go to that. Because as a woman, as a girl, you're told, go where it's safe, right? The big bad world of boys and men and competition tells you that choose an environment that is in some ways pre-selected so that you're codified to succeed, right? So handicap you even if you don't need the handicap. And at 16 and 17, I said, yes, I wanted to go. And I chose, it was chosen for me, a college called Smith College, which was in a little town called Northampton in Western Massachusetts. And I got on a plane the first time I was going to America, the first time I was on a plane without my family. And in these days, I grew up in Bangalore. There was no international airport in Bangalore. So my parents brought me to Bombay, and I will never forget flying TWA. I was flying Bombay to Brussels, Brussels to a little place called Hadley in Springfield, Massachusetts, and then I was going to take a bus to school. And I remember the faces of my father, my mother, my sister. It was like they were saying goodbye to me and with so much trepidation. Got on this plane. We flew 3.5 hours to Cairo, and then we deplaned because there was a bomb scare. So here I was in Cairo. My bags had gone to Brussels. And this was the time, Alekha, which I know seems like Neanderthal, where there were no cell phones. There was no internet. There was no way other than a phone call of phoning home and saying, look, I'm okay. So all I said to the TWA people is that, listen, I just need to tell my mom that I'm okay. She just needs to know that I'm okay. And as very often happens in life, and it happened to me very recently also, is people come back to you with platitudes. And it's your choice whether you accept it or you let it go, you know. And I let it go. So when the lady at TWA said to me that, listen, I'll send a telex to your mother and tell her, I accepted that that was the case. I found out a week later that my mother had a stroke from anxiety because TWA never bothered to do what they said they would do. Let my mom know that I was okay. That failing that I never saw that message through taught me it's okay for women to be seen as assertive. It's okay for us to be seen as difficult. It's okay for us to not accept the platitudes that come our way because we want to be viewed as nice or accommodating or accepting. What is not okay is to not follow through on something that really matters to you. And I think that's the first lesson I learned even before I got to university. I got to university and I had the freedom to study whatever I wanted to study. But I was still bound by the convention and the traditional expectations back home. So I took a class in art history, but I was very quick to take a class in political science because on that weekly call home, my mother would say, but what's art history? And this is someone who is a composer, a writer, a musician, and a teacher whose songs have been published, performed, and continue to be taught over the last 40 years. And if I said to her I was studying art history, she would say, what's that? Why are you doing that? That's a hobby, you know? Do something that's going to make you educated. I spent my college really excelling because excelling was my way of making space for myself in the room. Because when you excel, you have a voice. And I understood that it didn't matter whether I was studying science or art history or political science or astronomy, or I even took a theater class, which I was terrified the transcript would go home and they would see this class on my transcript. I understood that when you excel, you get a seat at the table. And that's why you need to excel. Not for any other reason, not because other people push you to, or because that's the way in which you will make more money, or you will, in some way be happier. You excel because that gives you a voice. When you are the best at what you do, people stop and listen. And as women, we don't get listened to very often. It takes a lot of excelling to get to that point where people give you credibility in the room. Many of you will see that on a flight. How many of you are in an aircraft and you'll have someone sitting next to you, and you have Mrs. Shastri and you have Dr. Howard, and the hostess will say, Dr. Howard, vegetarian, non-vegetarian, and they'll turn to you and say, Ritu, what would you like? Women don't often get a seat at the table. Women don't often get equal respect. But when you excel, people sit up and they listen. But excelling also does another thing. It opens up a plethora of opportunities, and then what that means is you have to choose. And we're constantly socialized not to choose what we want, what makes us happy, but what will make us educated. And there I was, finishing my 4-year degree in 3 years, graduating magna cum laude, and I had the opportunity to do an internship. I had 2 internships. One was to work on Capitol Hill. I worked for a congresswoman called Patricia Schroeder. She ran something called the Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues. That was one option. And the other option was to go to Rome and work at the Gallery Borghese and work as an art historian. And that's what I really, really, really wanted to do. And when I said to my family, and by now I was 20 years old, independent, I had financed my entire education because I was there on a scholarship, but I still phoned home every week to ask for permission to live my life on my terms. And I lived my life on the basis of what I was told. Not because I did it out of love, that's a very different thing, or I did it because of being part of a collective decision-making in a family, which is also a different thing, and we do make compromises and adjustments for that, and this is not to suggest that you don't do that. But this was quite blatantly something that I didn't want to do, and that I ended up doing because I felt the pressure to conform with what was considered acceptable. And there I was in 1989, the only Indian girl on Capitol Hill in the Rayburn HOB. And I would wear saris, and I would wear my skirts from Anokhi, and I would be wandering down. And the security guards would say, can I take a picture with you? And at home, do people go to work on an elephant? Americans can be incredibly myopic about the rest of the world. And the only way I could do my 6 months in Rome was to agree to do 6 months in Washington, D.C. And all my life, up until that point, I'd been doing this trade-off, right? I will give you what you want, I'll be the workhorse, I'll be the racehorse, I'll do all these things. And in return, I'll take this little bit for myself. I'll do that little bit for myself. And I was already doing what we teach our young girls to do all of their lives. Constantly make trade-offs and compromises and hold a balance that is not theirs to hold. They don't need that burden of balance. And yet we put it on them and we socialize them. And I say this to all the women in the crowd, we do it too. We are the biggest enablers. And my mother, whose dream was to be a classical music vocalist and have a concert to which many people would come, every time I said something that sounded like that, it terrified her. And very often as mothers, we are terrified to let our daughters dream the dreams that we dreamed, because somehow we believe that the universe will not support it. So I ended up, after these 2 internships, I had done the bit in Rome, which was the best time of my life. I had a little Vespa. It was a lovely aquamarine color, and I would, buy a baguette and buy half a carafe of wine and go all over looking at museums. It was my first exposure to Renaissance art. I saw Caravaggio for the first time. I mean, those moments literally are things that I remember now, 35 years later. So I'd done the internship in Rome. It was time to pay the piper, and I landed up in DC to work in the Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues, which was a bipartisan panel. It was a lady called Olympia Snow, who was a Republican from Maine. And of course, she was a Democrat who married a Republican and then switched allegiance, because that's what women do. And Patricia Schroeder, who was a congresswoman from Colorado. And as part of the Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues, they were funding a small bank in Bangladesh called Grameen Bank. It was started by a man who they considered a little bit of an idiot, because he had left conventional banking to start something that was called Grameen Bank, which was microfinancing to women. And this bill had been passed around a couple of times in Congress. And you know, Congress is all about horse trading, right? You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So you're always trading votes. Like, vote for the arms lobby, I'll vote for tobacco. That's how it works. And this bill had been circulating, doing the rounds. And no one really wanted to deal with some guy who wanted to finance Bangladeshi women, the other end of the world. I mean, who actually cared? These weren't real things. And thank God, because they were not real issues, 2 women got to take that decision. And these 2 women got on a plane with their staff, which included a 21-year-old intern from Bangalore, India, and flew to Dhaka, where for the first time in my life, I saw women and handloom. And that experience changed my life, because I saw women getting water from the well. I saw women looking after their children. I saw women talking, making breakfast for their in-laws. And then they would have a quick bath and they would go and sit at this loom and they would start, and it would go cut, 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 cut. And that sound has remained with me for all of my life. That experience of seeing women's lives and understanding that, oh my God, it doesn't matter if I come from Bangalore and I went to America. Everyone is trying to do the same balancing that I'm trying to do. We are all the same. We're dealing with the same issues. We're dealing with the same structures constructed around us. We're trying to figure out the same things. And somewhere within me was this feeling that I wanted to come home. I wanted to come back to my own country. And I wanted to have a voice in the place that I had grown up. We have a beautiful word in Hindi. It's called Karma Bhumi. Karam is your destiny, but not destiny as something you don't have control over, but rather the place where you come back to actualize your purpose. And I realized that coming back to India and being successful, living my life, speaking my truths here is what was the most important thing to me. But I still didn't have the courage to turn around and say to my family that, you know what, I want to come back, I want to work with textiles, I want to work with weavers. And there was a little pub called the Hawk and Dove, which was around the corner from the Rayburn HOB, the Capitol building block that I worked in DC. And I met a gentleman called Jerry Rao. Jerry Rao was at that time the CEO of Citibank in India. And Citibank was this big American bank that had come into India. It was going to change the world. And people thought about Citibankers the way you think about astronauts or superheroes. They had everything, right? They had all the things that India of the 90s aspired to. A fancy apartment, a great car, disposable income, parties every week in a 5-star hotel, international travel. They even gave you a leather bag that had the Citibank logo on it. Being a Citibanker was wearing a sign on your forehead that said, I've made it. And sitting in the Hawk and Dove, I met this gentleman, Jerry Rao. We got chatting, and he said, hey, you sound, you're such an interesting person. Do you think you'd like to come back and work with Citibank? And all of the little light bulbs in my scheming, devious back brain, which was always finding ways to have the life I wanted by giving people the life they needed, all of those light bulbs went off. And I thought, you know what? This is a great way to come back to India, work for Citibank, tick that box, and have the opportunity to actually do the things that I want to do. And of course, when you keep succeeding and doing well, you become complacent. You have an inflated sense of your own self. And you realize that you can do anything because you've succeeded. You've taken all these exams, you've done all this stuff, you've scammed so many people, you've done so much stuff, you know. So what's the big deal? So I ended up July 17th, 1991 at Citibank. And there I was. And on the first day, they gave me a piece of paper and they said, you know, these are all entries to be passed. And they gave me a password. And I was so busy being impressed by myself, at my 22-year-old self in Citibank with the little leather bag and my newly little banker wardrobe, I forgot the password. And there I was at 6:30 in the evening, and I had to hit F2, and it kept asking me username and password, and I didn't know. And the next day, I said, okay, that's fine, I'll figure it out. I'll ask someone, like I'll check with someone tomorrow. It can't be such a big deal. 5 in the morning, I got a call from data center to say, hey, did you authorize those checks last night? And I started to say, you know, I wasn't really sure. I was going to figure it out. And they said, well, you know, checks weren't printed this morning. And checks weren't printed means payments haven't gone out. Payments haven't gone out means you're going to have a whole bunch of screaming merchants. This was a card business, who are going to be at our door. And I still thought it must be a bit of an exaggeration because big deal, I'll figure it out. I got to work the next day. There were about 30 men in their white veshtis, which is what the traditional Chennai attire of the half-sleeved shirt and the cotton sarong. And they were baying for blood. And my boss called me in and he said, listen, if you want a career in banking, you have to be a lot smarter than this. And I was flabbergasted. Imagine for the first time in my life, someone was telling me I wasn't smart. It was like telling me I wasn't a woman, or telling me that I'd woken up and I had the head of a hippo. I mean, it was inconceivable to me that I could not be smart. And he said, listen, I don't think you're up to this job, so I'm going to give you another job, which is, I don't need you to authorize entries, but here's this suitcase with the check stationery. And you must drop that off every evening when you go home. I'd go home every evening, and in my anxiety, I'd forget the suitcase. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning, and there used to be an auto guy outside, and I would beg him to take me back to the data center in Shakti Towers and give them the check stationery, because I knew that it would go in for printing at 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning. So routinely, I went home at 6:30, anxious and worrying that I wasn't doing well. I'd wake up at 2 o'clock and realize that I'd missed doing the one thing I was supposed to do, head back to Citibank, drop off the check stationery, and come back every day. And because I was anxious, and because I was worrying about how I was being perceived, I ended up doing worse. I couldn't do basic things. I also thought of myself as this America returned hotshot, this person who had, been fourth in the country, who was magna cum laude, who had lived in Rome. I thought of myself as the bee's knees. And there was a person who sat in the desk next to me, and God bless her, I don't know where she is in the world, but I think of her very often, and particularly when I speak to groups. And her name was Ashwini. And Ashwini had grown up in an orphanage just outside of Coimbatore. She had been educated by the nuns in a vernacular school. And she spoke excellent Tamil and very little English. And Ashwini had actually been hired at Citibank through a parallel program. So they had something that was called the Management Associate Program for hotshots like me. And they had something else which was called a Customer Interface Officer for people who they felt came from lesser institutions. Because you were not being judged on your ability or talent. You were being judged on a bunch of things on your resume, right? And by then I had figured out how to win that one. Ashwini was next to me, and in the first 6 months we were doing the same job. A year later, she was doing 3 more things than I was doing. 2 years into the job, she was my boss. And I had a really, really tough time handling the fact that I was not the bee's knees. And I started thinking about, oh my God, what should I do? Because it's always plan B, right? How do you escape? And I said, oh, maybe this is not the right job for me, and I'm going to ask them for a job where they'll understand that I'm very smart. So I said, you know what? I want to work in credit and collections. Because you guys think, operations, I don't get it. And I pushed very hard, and I asked for this job in credit and collections, which involved number crunching and working with a terrible software called DBase and building programs, none of which I had any interest in or, as I found out, ability to do well. So 4 years into my Citibank career, I was, and I probably still am, the only person in the history of Citibank to never even get a single promotion. I never got a raise. I never got a promotion. I got a pat on the back once because I think I organized a dinner party for executives who were coming from overseas or something like that. They always invited me to everything though because I was smart, I knew art, I knew music, I knew other things. So they invited me like the performing bear. But I didn't have a seat at the table. And then something happened that changed my life. I had married a colleague at Citibank, another distraction, and I got pregnant. And in 1994, I gave birth to a child who passed away within 3 hours of being born. And there I was, 26 years old, in a hospital bed, having lost a child in a job I didn't want. And I realized, you know what, I can't go lower than this. So at this thing, at all the parameters that we use to assess what success is, I had been failing. I wasn't great at my job, although it was the job that everybody said smart people do. I wasn't good at my family life because I pushed myself so hard. I didn't take care of myself. I tortured myself for years. Did I bring this on? Why did this happen? Right? I wasn't really good at anything, and more than anything, I wasn't happy. And when that happens to you, when you fail to that extent, you realize in hindsight how absolutely bloody lucky you are. Because when I was sitting there and I realized this is rock bottom, there's only one way to go, and that's up. And then I began the process of reinventing my life to live a life of authenticity, to be exactly who I am, to do what makes me happy, and to always encourage everyone else to do the same thing. I quit my job with Citibank, and I used to take a train to a place called Madurai, which was not far from Chennai, and I learned weaving. And sitting there amongst all those women, I also learned to speak Tamil, which was my mother tongue, and which my lovely colonized past had taught me to say Tamil. I learned to wear a sari. I learned the rules of my own culture. I learned the beauty of my own culture. And I learned what it was like to feel proud of my rootedness and to embrace being Indian with pride and with confidence. So that brings me to this first. I had the 4 P's because I was talking to the kids, and I was going to say, to succeed then, the most important thing is you need purpose. Without purpose, there's no success. So it's not the handbag, it's not the international travel, it's not the job title, it's not the brand that the company will give you, it's none of that. It's purpose. Why do I exist? Why am I doing this? How is this making me grow and evolve as a human being? The second thing I learned is passion. If you care about things, you don't forget them. If I cared about the Czech stationery, I would never have left that suitcase behind. I'd have carried it with me every single day. You have to be passionate about what you do. The world places way too much emphasis on IQ. But when you intellectualize things, you distance yourself from them. So if you're an educator, be a passionate educator. If you're a banker, be a passionate banker. If you're a physicist, be a passionate physicist. Passion is what allows you to stay and feel every day that it's a beautiful day and you're going to do something amazing. Then you need pillars. Because you can have passion and you can have purpose. But if you're not grounded, if you don't know where you come from and where you're going, if you don't have values to guide you, whatever those values may be, love for the family, pride in your country, wanting to help other women, wanting a world that's more equal, more equitable, more gentle, whatever it may be. If you have I run out of time? I'm happy to stop with only my 3 Ps. I've said a lot already. So if you have purpose, and you have passion, and you have pillars, there are 2 more quick Ps. One is, there really is no such thing as a free lunch. You need perseverance. You have to slog. In the last 2 weeks, I've been in Maheshwar in Madhya Pradesh. I've been in London for 2 days. I've been in a Noida factory. I've been in Cochin in the dockyard. I've been in Delhi. And because this was important to me, because it's important to Alekha, I moved my meetings and I'm back in Delhi on Monday morning because I wanted to be here today for her. Perseverance, hard work. It's not going to happen otherwise. If you want to be the best, you have to persevere. Don't accept shortcuts. Don't accept anything less than the highest standards for yourself. And my last P, and I'm going to end there because you've been so patient, is play. It's so important when you follow your passion and find your purpose to keep room for playfulness. Because if the beautiful thing I saw over the weekend is I was watching a match, which was Djokovic and Sinner, and there was Roger Federer sitting in the audience enjoying the tennis. After years and years and years of play, practice, and in and out, he loves it still. He comes, he watches. It's so important to play. It's so important to continue to have fun. Because if you take what you love and make it what you do for work, for security, for other things, and you forget to play, it takes all the joy out of it. So my advice is, let's encourage our children to have purpose, to find their passion. Let's put those pillars in place. Let's get them to persevere. And let's make sure they play. I was going to start with a film, but I think I want to end with that. And I wanted to just play a 2-minute film to tell you what those Ps have done to my life, where from that 25-year-old in the hospital bed who was failing at everything to a 56-year-old who still fails. The only difference is I'm okay with it. Thank you.